What is the creepiest family secret you have discovered? Serious. My mom told me this over dinner a few years back like it was no big deal. When I was 6, my grandma mother's side wanted me to sleep over at her place for the weekend. It's noteworthy that she never really liked me. I remember her as a cold witch, 6-year-old brain. Her housekeeper was nicer to me than she was. My mom said no, she wouldn't let me sleep over at her mom's. Granny got really angry, saying something along the lines of "you will regret this." So she didn't hear from her for a while and went to the house to check up on her. Granny had suicided herself with sleeping pills. Here is where it gets creepy. My mom found her diary and her last entry with things like, "Granddaughter, me, is evil, needs to be killed and it's her job to do so." My name was in her calendar for that weekend. Basically my grandma wanted to kill me when I was 6. I'm really glad my mom trusted her gut and said no to the deadly sleepover. Edit. Wow, thanks for all the feedback. 5k upvotes. Just wow. I'm trying to answer your questions as best as I can. Edit. Thanks for the silver. Also, same grandma took my mother to a children's doctor who was known to have euthanized kids during World War II, Nazi Germany. When my mom found out as a grown-up, she asked her mother why on earth her mother would take her to that doctor, and her answer was a cold. Why do you think we didn't have to wait for the appointment? Creepy effing Nazi granny. Edit. Misremembered. Grandma actually said, "Why do you think the waiting room was so empty all the time?" As in a good way, like no waiting. My grandma and her 9 siblings are very close. So when they each got a call saying a family member had died and they had inherited a large sum of money, they thought it was a scam. Turns out their very strict and religious father had a secret affair and an additional child, Marie. Well, Marie, now in her 80s, had passed away, so had her husband. They had no children. So the closest relatives were my grandma and her siblings. And that's how 10 religious people in their 70s and 80s learned their dad had cheated on their mom and they had a half-sister they never got to meet. Oof, that must really suck. My grandmother was addicted to those speed diet pills in the late 1960s and had a collection of wigs that she used to impersonate other people to pick up their prescriptions. My aunt is still addicted to those speed diet pills and travels over state lines to get them. 8 hours round trip, 4 hours in a waiting room. To be fair, she is overweight, but she's been on them for like 15 years and only takes them now to feel normal. It's pretty fucked. My mom had me at 14. My father is a child rapist who was dating my grandma. This is probably the worst one. Hope you're doing fine knowing this. Not really a well-kept secret, but one of my cousins is a neo-Nazi. It's safe to say no matter how bad I fuck up my life, I'll never be the black sheep in the family. You mean the Irish sheep, I guess. I discovered that my brother and sister, which are twins, had sexual intercourse at least once. That's some Lannister shit right there. Bruh. Twincest is a dark secret, that's for sure. Are you by any chance a motherless dwarf? My dad once found a mummified human foot just chilling in a trunk in his basement. My grandfather was an orthopedic surgeon who was stationed in New Guinea during World War II and by all accounts was never quite the same after the war. Our best guess regarding the foot is that it belonged to one of his patients and either had some sort of abnormality my grandfather found interesting, or he was just super proud of the amputation job he did. My dad and his buddy, who were 12 or 13 at the time, naturally decided that the best course of action was to hang the foot from the front porch of the girl they were crushing on. And apparently no one in town batted an eye over it other than thinking it was a good prank. And that, kids, is how I met your mother. Worst game of footsie ever. A few years ago one of my dad's cousins did one of those DNA kits. A few weeks later she was contacted and told that there was several close relatives in their database that aren't listed on the family tree she made. It turns out that my great-grandfather faked his death in a life insurance scam and then started a new family on the other side of the country. He never got in contact with my great-grandmother or his children with her, my grandfather and his sister. It kind of crazy because he only passed away a few years before this all came to light. That my grandpa was a drug addict and was eventually cast out of the family. My aunt woke up one night to find him in the house, talking to a real estate agent. He snuck in and tried to sell their house while they were asleep. He also double mortgaged their house, so he got basically all my nan's income. When my nan tried to move the family away from him, she realized she had almost no money due to this. Bank director said it was okay because men are supposed to control the bank account. She was stuck there because of him, and he was leeching off their money and there was nothing she could do about it. He snuck in and tried to sell their house while they were asleep. He also double mortgaged their house, so he got basically all my nan's income. But how? I mean, don't both sides have to sign mortgage? That my aunt, my dad's sister, had an affair with the brother of her husband, and when he found out he hanged himself, and after his death they both harassed the wife of the brother so much that she drank poison and died. They live happily ever after. P.S. English not so strong, sorry. Edit. Just to make it simpler for everyone. Aunt is A. A is married to husband, H. H has a brother, B, who has his own wife, W. So A sleeps with B. A is cheating on H and B is cheating on W. H finds out, hangs himself. A and B torment W, who is B's wife. She kills herself, too. Now both cheated on partners are dead, and the two cheaters, A and B, live happily ever after. First of all, your English is pretty good. Second, TF was that. My grandma had 6 children. I always thought my oldest uncle looked and acted different from the rest of the siblings. When I was 24 I found out he didn't share the same father as the rest of them. But that isn't the juiciest part, his real dad is my grandpa's brother. Uncle Father Oscar. My grandfather had a little crazy aunt who lives in the attic. His father's sister had some sort of mental illness, and they were apparently worried about how that would look for the family. So they locked her in the attic of his boyhood home, Jane Eyre style, and basically just kept her fed and otherwise ignored her. I found out about this when he briefly mentioned it a few years ago, like it was an entirely normal thing to do with a family member. That is unbelievably cruel. Dude, that was a thing back in the day. They were called secret rooms. BC, that's where you kept your family's secret, or embarrassment disappointments rooms. BC, what was in it was an embarrassment disappointment to the family. They'd also just haul their disabled kids off to torturous group homes and forget about them. So freaking sad. They made a movie called Disappointment Room that was based on one such true story. Nobody can give me a straight answer on why my great uncle died before the age of 10. It's likely he died due to negligence, but everyone gives a different story. My father's parents both died in the 90s. Around 5-10 years ago I did a 23andMe test, mostly for kicks and to look out for any health issues. Last year I was contacted by someone through the service who was trying to find blood relatives because both of her parents had been adopted as infants, and we had a pretty strong genetic connection. Long story short, my grandfather had an affair in the 1950s and fathered twins. My aunt and uncle were pretty floored to find out they have half siblings. My father died 4 years ago from suicide, so he never knew. To get even weirder, my mother grew up with these twins after they had been adopted. She was friends with my father's half-siblings decades before she married him. My mum told me this when I was probably 14, though it happened a few years before this. I found out that her sister's husband, my uncle by marriage, was in prison and would stay there for a long time. It came out that he had raped and sexually abused my cousin, daughter to my mum's brother, when she was younger and had been doing do for a while. She had gained the courage after many years of this to tell her parents, and he was arrested. It's been maybe 5 years since my mum told me, and he's still going to be in prison for a long time. My cousin is an adult now and she's doing much better from what I heard and is happy with her life now. My aunt and uncle had their oldest daughter lobotomized because she was probably a bit mentally ill, was very combative with them and was in her teens and becoming interested in sex. This was in the late 1960s. My father never spoke to his brother again over this. We had no contact with them whatsoever when I was growing up. My mom and dad told me what happened a couple of years ago. Are you a Kennedy? My grandpa, my mother's father, killed his first wife. My great-grandmother tried to kill my grandma, my mom's mother, several times when she still was a child. My mom had an affair with her sister's husband. My dad got killed because of a wrecked car. Maybe more sad THSM creepy. My great-grandfather died in a mental institution. However, everyone who asked was told he died in prison. Because it was less shameful in the 30s than being crazy. My dad tells us that whenever he smells nail polish remover he feels extremely sick because when he was a toddler he drank his sister's nail polish remover and went to hospital. But then one night, I was up late chatting with my younger brother in his bedroom talking about our dad, and my brother tells me about a conversation he was either part of or overheard. Apparently, according to my dad, when his parents, my grandparents, were going through the Great Depression they lost everything, as many families did, but it affected my grandmother horribly. Something must have snapped in her mind and she became a little bit insane. The real reason the smell of nail polish remover was so horrible to my dad was because one day my grandmother had decided that feeding my dad the nail polish remover as an infant in a crib was an easy way to kill him. It was only my grandfather rushing in and stopping her that stopped my dad from dying. Makes me wonder what sort of behaviors I might be prone to given some traits are more prevalent every other generation. My parents are directly responsible for at least 8 deaths due to workplace accidents over the years. Indirectly responsible for probably hundreds more thanks to family interests in chemistry and mining. Grandparents on both sides were also more than a little helpful to the Nazis during World War II, resulting in a lot more deaths over time on side and a lot more $sign to the family coffers. I was always told my dad's cousin died from a bad reaction to a flu shot. He never got the flu shot and I avoided for many years. Thankfully I didn't catch it often. Years later, especially with the rise of anti-science anti-vaxxers, I got one since I realized it's unfair to people who can't get and could easily catch it. I didn't get sick from the shot. Years later, I was talking with my aunt at a family party. They told me it was most likely AIDS that killed him. Coming from a very Catholic upbringing, he had to hide that he was gay. I never told him about hearing this from his sister. I'm still kind of pissed that I believed he would lie to me, but honestly, he's lying to himself just the same. Story 1. Not so much creepy but certainly juicy. My cousin is trying to pass off her own biological daughter as an adopted daughter because in my family it's heavily frowned upon to have sex outside of marriage, let alone have a baby. The story she is trying to sell is her friend died giving birth to this baby and conveniently has no direct relatives for the baby to go to and the dad is in jail. I'm pretty sure her siblings and her parents are in on this lie and just don't want anyone looking down them. We can all see through the lies and we conveniently didn't see her for most part of the year before this kid came into the picture. She also treats this kid pretty poorly, like she's in denial she has a kid at all. I feel sorry for the kid. Story 2. This one is sad but I'll sum it up quickly. My grandmother passed late last year and her eldest son, my uncle, relied heavily on her for money because he would often blow all his honey on gambling. We all knew my grandmother wanted to be buried back in her home country, and in our culture the eldest son is the one to handle all this stuff, so the responsibility landed on him to go to the homeland and make sure my grandmother is buried and all the working papers are done correctly. My grandmother also has land in her name that automatically went to him and his brothers and sisters. My grandmother wasn't even buried yet and he sold the land, took the money, did God knows what with it, and lied to the entire family about what he was really doing. They all know now and have cut him out. He is fucked. Editing, spelling. My grandfather from my mother's side died way before I was born. I was always told that he fell off the balcony and died. A year or two ago I found out what really happened. When I was I think 13, my mom was telling the story to my uncle's girlfriend while my mom, uncle's GF and me, we're sitting at the table. I was just minding my business, while my mom was whispering to my uncle's GF. At some point I heard my mom tell something about her dad, and I started listening to what she was saying. She explained that her dad was an alcoholic, and could be pretty abusive at times. When he got drunk, he would sometimes threaten to kill himself. On the night before my mom's birthday, after he put her and her siblings to bed, he got drunk and threatened to throw himself off the balcony. He stood on the edge of the balcony, on the other side of the fence thing. Can't remember what it's called in English, sorry. My grandma tried to calm him down, and to get him safe inside. It worked, my grandfather calmed down. But instead of getting inside, he accidentally let go of the fence and fell off the balcony. He probably thought that if he landed in a correct way he wouldn't break too many bones or something, so he tried to move while in the air. It didn't work, and he died. So yeah, when my mom woke up the next morning, on her birthday, her father was dead. Some details may be wrong. It's been, like I said, a year or two ago since I heard this story, and frankly I'm too timid and kinda scared to ask my mom the whole story again because it'll always be a sensitive topic. My great-grandfather on my mom's side was a pedophile and rapist. He molested and raped all 3 of his own daughters, including my grandmother, and molested my mother. He shot his wife and then himself in the head before he had the chance to lay a hand on me. The hardest part for me to come to terms with is how the fuck my grandmother, who was the sweetest person ever, allowed her only daughter, my mom, to be around that sick fuck knowing damn well what would happen. My mom left me alone with her father, who had molested her for most of her childhood. When I asked her what the fuck she was thinking, she seemed genuinely shocked. It had never occurred to her, because he really emphasized their relationship and basically treated her like his wife. She didn't think of him as a child molester per se. That level of trauma really fucks with your sense of normal. My great-grandmother was a victim of Stockholm Syndrome and everyone treated her like she had this fairy tale marriage. I always thought I was born of an affair between my parents, who were both married to other people at the time. Last year, my grandmother told me that in fact, my dad and his first wife wanted a son, but had a daughter. They tried to buy my mom's son, my older half-brother, from her, but my mom wouldn't sell. Instead, they agreed to give my mother $10K to have another baby. The deal somehow fell through after my dad had gotten my mom pregnant. My dad went to prison and got divorced from his first wife, and the first wife tried to steal me from the hospital. Not creepy really, just funny. My mom and dad always said their wedding anniversary was in January and my older brother was born approximately 9 months later. When I became an adult I figured out they had to get married and never told us their real wedding date. They have both copped to this, but still refuse to reveal their real wedding date. Well, when my father was cleaning out his mom's house after she passed, he found his parents' marriage certificate which gave their wedding date as 3 months later than what they told him. My parents got married in the late 50s, my grandparents got married in the late 30s. Like father like son. Shoot, when my mom got pregnant with my oldest brother as a teen, her parents, brothers, most of the family, treated her like shit and were awful. My great-grandma, who was and always will be one of the baddest bitches I have ever met, called a family meeting at my grandma's house and then read aloud a list of every single person in the family who had either been pregnant or gotten his wife pregnant before marriage. She summed it up with this being a common thing. None of them gets to even try to step to my mom when most of them did the same thing, and if they want to try shit again, then they get to have a chat with her about it. Love you forever, great-grandma. It was actually about my half-brother, who's now my half-sister. I was never allowed near them as a child. Never allowed to be alone in the same room with them. Never allowed to close the door when I was with any of my half-brothers, in fact, but with them it was different. Whenever they were visiting, they always stayed in the basement. Once they graduated, I didn't see them for 5 years. I only learned maybe 2 years ago that they were trans, which was quite the shock, but what was more shocking was finding out why I was never allowed to be alone with my sibling. My parents back in the day had that type of internet where it tracks everything that's done on it. My sibling was on the Wi-Fi at some point, and my mother checked the history. Apparently, they were watching graphic rape. The rape wasn't what disturbed my parents, but instead how utterly violent it was. And they watched a lot of it. The other thing was that it was child rape. Of children that were my age at the time it happened. So, either the videos were incest, too. A lot of things started to make sense when I learned these things, and honestly, it makes me sad. My half-siblings had a rougher childhood, and I feel like they were forced to grow up too fast and it fucked with them at the same time. I don't know if they would have actually done anything to hurt me, but the thought is one that stayed with me for a long time. I love my sister, even though I don't get to see her often. I've only seen her twice over the past few years. Though I am on edge due to knowing about those events, I do genuinely hope she's doing better. First thing was I found a letter on my mom's desk in high school. It was from my grandpa, her dad, but was addressed from a federal state prison. I had absolutely no clue he was in prison, so I plucked up the courage and asked her WTF. He was elderly and a bit eccentric but not at all violent or dangerous, crazy or sexual even. She tells me he's in there because he pleaded guilty to first-degree murder of his wife's, my mom's stepmom, mother's murder. Apparently she was 95 and bedbound with dementia and they found out she had cancer, so he smothered her. Then I'm asking my grandma, mom's real mom, if she thought he'd ever be capable of something like that and if she thinks those kinds of traits or way of thinking could be passed on through generations somehow. Grandma proceeds to tell me that the man who I know as grandpa is not my mom's real dad. My mom's real dad was a violent drunk, came home one night with a gun threatening to kill my grandma, the children and himself. Grandma wrestles the gun from him and fatally shoots him. She was never convicted as it was ruled self-defense. So my scandalous family secrets, my grandparents are killers. That my dad raped my mother in front of me. He was drunk and my mom let him because he had a pocket knife in his hand. I still take Xanax and Percocet daily to cope with my traumatic experience.